Coming up on Arirang News, all people arriving in South Korea starting today, whether citizens or not, will have to self-isolate for 2 weeks. Systems are in place to monitor them and make sure they follow the rules. President Jaein pledges support for small and medium-sized businesses and local households. Relief is on the way, he says, as the government draws up a second extra budget. And the Bank of Korea is providing local banks with billions of dollars secured through the currency swap deal with the U.S. It's expected to help stabilize the exchange market amid the sharp depreciation of the Korean won. It's 5 p.m. here in Seoul. Thanks for joining us on Arirang News. I'm Devin Whiting. Starting today, South Korea is requiring all people arriving in the country from overseas, whether South Korean nationals or not, to self-isolate for 2 full weeks. And they'll be tracked and monitored to make sure they comply. Yoon Jung-min reports.
To slow the number of COVID-19 infections, all arrivals from abroad are to be self-quarantined for 2 weeks as of midnight on April 1st. That's regardless of their nationality or where they departed from. Once people arrive at airports, they will be informed of the quarantine rules and asked to download an app so that health authorities can track their whereabouts.
When I get in here, they ask me to download the app. They ask me to stay at home 2 weeks. They are checking temperature all the time.
They asked me to stay at my school in Daegu for 2 weeks. I feel all right. I arrived here healthy.
To prevent the arrivals from using public transportation, the government plans to provide special buses or trains for them. They strongly recommend arrivals use their own cars if they have them. People displaying symptoms will be tested at the airport upon arrival. Those without symptoms will be ordered to self-isolate at home or at quarantine facilities for at least 14 days. Those who have been authorized by the South Korean embassy to visit the country for special purposes will be exempt from the self-quarantine as long as they don't have symptoms. Those who break the self-quarantine rules could face legal punishment. With the 2 weeks of self-quarantining, the government aims to curb the inflow of imported coronavirus cases without having to close the border. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
South Korea and the U.S. are reportedly close to signing a new deal on how much Seoul should pay for the stationing of American troops in the country. It's been in the works for months. South Korean media reports say this time the Special Measures Agreement, or SMA, will be for 5 years. Washington had been demanding Seoul pay $4 billion just for this year, but it's reportedly lowered that amount. Once they've signed, the South Korean government's expected to work on getting the deal ratified in Parliament by May 29th. In the meantime, starting today, the U.S. has put South Korean workers at its local bases on unpaid leave. South Korean Defense Ministry expressed regret at that move and said it'll work with Parliament to enact special laws to support the livelihoods of the people affected. President Moon Jae-in went today to a major industrial zone in one of the regions of the country hit hardest by COVID-19. There he thanked the workers for their efforts to overcome the outbreak, and he promised all-out support from the government. Kim Min-ji reports.
President Moon Jae-in said that the government will be protecting the country's industries and people's livelihoods, pledging to make sure no businesses have to shut down due to the COVID-19 pandemic. He spoke Wednesday to companies at the Gumi National Industrial Complex in Gyeongsangbuk-do Province, one of the hardest-hit regions in the country.
정부는 우리 경제와 산업, 민생을 반드시 지켜낼 것입니다. 소상공인과 기업들이 코로나19 피해 때문에 문을 닫는 일이 없도록 하겠습니다. 소상공인, 자영업자부터 중소, 중견기업까지 기업 구호 긴급 자금을 충분히 지원할 것입니다.
Moon said the government has been implementing its multi-billion-dollar emergency relief package to ease the burden on local businesses and the self-employed, adding that help is on the way for households too, as the administration draws up a second extra budget. The president's visit to the region comes just over a month after he visited the nearby city of Daegu, the epicenter of COVID-19 in South Korea, likely to comfort the people there and show the government's determination to revive the economy. The complex itself has been lauded for its efforts to tackle the outbreak. Despite people having been affected there, factories have been operating normally in accordance with quarantine measures. On top of that, some companies there have been donating mask filters and negative pressure equipment to the local community. One of the firms also produces fluorine polyamide, one of the key materials that was put under export control by Japan.
코로나19는 대외 의존도가 높은 우리 경제에 큰 위협이 되고 있지만 많은 우리 기업들이 극복의 모범 사례를 만들고 있습니다. 기업의 수출과 해외 활동에 차질이 없도록 외교적 노력을 계속해 나가겠습니다.
President Moon again stressed that unity and cooperation were key to overcoming COVID-19, thanking local authorities, companies, and quarantine staff for their efforts. He said together they will be able to see light at the end of the tunnel. 김민지, Arirang News.
Time now for an in-depth look at the market news this afternoon, and for that I'm joined on the line by Dr. Song Soo-young, Professor of Finance at Jaein University. Professor Song, thank you for coming on, as always.
Yeah, thank you for see you again. Yeah.
Well, in today's Emergency Economic Council, the government announced measures to support specific industries, including tourism, broadcasting, film, and so on. This is worth about $340 million. How much do you think this is going to help?
Yeah, actually, these tourism and the communication and the film and the so those parts, in terms of the size of economic contribution to the GDP, is not much. But however, there are so many employees working those service industries, particularly for the tourism is the most hardest affected. And the film industry also affected because of the social distance. Particularly for the communications, the self-employed and the small shops for the selling of the smartphones are affected. So that's why the current sectoral assistance plan has been classified and has been offered to the people who are now influenced by the coronavirus mostly. So this is for just lower income people and the self-employed people, and then the industry who has been hit hardest due to the outbreak of the coronavirus. So that makes sense and very good for the general robustness of the recovery of the economy in the coming days.
Well, now, the Federal Reserve has announced a new mechanism that'll enable the central banks of other countries to swap their U.S. government bonds for dollars. This is known as the FEMA repo facility. In what ways will this affect the global economy and Korea?
Yeah, particularly, but several weeks ago, we have signed up some swap deal of the dollar supply directly with the Federal Reserve Bank of New York in U.S., but that is limited to 14 countries. But the recent temporary repurchase agreement facility for the foreign and international monetary authorities, this is a quite new and very effective steps to increase the liquidity of the supply of the dollar. The reason is because this is usually conducted by the Federal Reserve Bank of New York through the open market operation for the commercial banks in the U.S. who make a reserve deposit to the Federal Reserve Bank. So this means that using the U.S. Treasury bonds, Treasury notes, as a collateral, then borrow the dollars. And the reverse repo is also possible, so which means that the lending dollars and then the collateral accept the collateral. So this is applied to the international level. So between the Korean banks and they hold, as long as they hold the U.S. Treasury notes or Treasury bonds, they use those U.S. Treasury bonds notes, and then receive the dollar as submit the U.S. Treasury notes and bonds as a collateral. That is, repo market is open to the international level. This could have. This is also beneficial to the U.S. financial market. The reason is recently U.S. Treasury market has been subject to the large volatility because of the concern of the shortage of the dollar, the international settlement currency, then some governments or some central banks just sell the U.S. Treasuries in a fire sale. That could increase the volatility a lot. And rather, people and other agents would like to purchase the U.S. Treasury because of this is regarded as the most safest asset. Therefore, that could increase the volatility of the U.S. Treasury market. That is not good for the stability of the U.S. financial market and international financial market. That's why these temporary FEMA account is, as long as the central government, other foreign countries have a FEMA account, they could participate in this establishment. Then that is beneficial to the supply of the worldwide, international level supply of the liquid dollar currency.
Indeed, very interesting. And now the Dow Jones on Wall Street has just wrapped up its worst quarter since 1987. What's the story in the global markets today?
Yeah, actually, Dow Jones Industrial has been dropped by 1.84%. The Nasdaq is 0.95%. S&P 1.6%. So this is really serious and substantial, significant negative impact on the stock market. And now, because this is mainly because the the outbreak and the spread of the coronavirus in U.S. and in European countries, that is right now beyond any some sensible estimation. So currently, South Korea and China has clearly showed the declining number of the outbreak, number of the coronavirus patients. So that is good signal. But however, in Europe and particularly Southern Europe and the U.S., we have to wait and see, but most likely to be worst hit for the stock market in those areas. So,
got it. All right, Professor Song, thanks so much for sharing your insights today. We appreciate it.
Thank you for inviting me.
And now South Korea's central bank has started auctioning off some of the dollars it secured through the currency swap deal with the U.S. In the first tranche, local banks got more than $8 billion. That was actually less than what was on offer. And that could mean the local dollar shortage is not as severe as expected. Lee Sung-jae has more.
$8.72 billion US. That's the amount the Bank of Korea offered in loans to local banks and other financial institutions on Tuesday during a 30-minute online auction to provide them with $80 million in 7-day debt and $7.92 billion to be paid back within 84 days. The figure was below the BOK's initial expectation of $10 billion, which the central bank said was due to the considerable easing of the local dollar crunch.
The bidding amount was smaller, but the bidding size is, because it's in foreign currency liquidity isn't that bad right now.
According to the BOK, the dollar injection will stabilize the currency market, with more auctions to take place depending on the market situation. The amount is the first batch of the central bank's $60 billion currency swap agreement it recently signed with the Federal Reserve, aimed at tackling a dollar crunch and a plunge in the local currency amid the COVID-19 outbreak and flatlining oil prices. South Korea signed its first currency swap deal with the U.S. in 2008 to cushion the country from the fallout caused by the global financial crisis. Successful bidders from Tuesday's auction will receive the dollars within the next 24 to 48 hours. Lee Sung-jae, Arirang News.
Now, amid the coronavirus outbreak, South Korean companies first adopted the work-at-home model, but now they're adopting more sustainable systems. These are the so-called smart work systems. Kim Jae-hee reports.
Workers at large companies in South Korea are gradually returning to their offices instead of working from home. But some employees will adopt flexible hours under the so-called smart work system. This will effectively reduce the number of workers coming into the office at the same time, allowing firms to practice some level of social distancing while reducing the inefficiencies caused by working from home. Industry sources say SK Group is switching to this smart work system starting Wednesday. Hyundai Motor and Kia Motors are also temporarily adopting flexible working hours to reduce close contact among employees. The COVID-19 outbreak had a limited impact on South Korea's March exports. The Trade Ministry said on Wednesday that total outbound shipments in March amounted to some $46.9 billion, a decrease of 0.2% on year. The ministry says the increase in exports of semiconductors and IT products due to the rise of a non-contact lifestyle and increase in online activities reduced the fall. March imports were down 0.3% to $41.8 billion. The trade surplus came to around $5 billion in March, with exports exceeding imports for the 98th month in a row. Meanwhile, recent data shows big companies in South Korea performed poorly last year. Local data service Infobigs reported on Wednesday that the combined operating income of Korea's top 10 business groups nosedived last year, impacted by the U.S.-China trade war and Japan's export curbs on Korea. It said the total operating profit of 94 non-financial companies belonging to the top 10 groups came to some $28 billion last year, down nearly 60% on year. Kim Jae-hee, Arirang News.
And that does it for this newscast. Thank you for watching.